So many of my clients come to me because they want to be more effective leaders, period. And we all know there are about 150 different leadership skills, so where to start? Whenever I'm working with a corporate group, meaning that I'm working with an intact team within an organization, or I'm working with a group of leaders, a group of professionals that are from all different industries and walks of life, every time, 65% of them or more all want to work on the same exact skill. And I'm betting you could even guess what that is. 65% of them say, when I ask strengths and areas for growth, their challenge or their area for growth that they want to work on the most is handling difficult conversations. Same thing as how to deal with conflict. Same thing as how to hold someone accountable. Same thing as how to bring up the hard stuff. And you may have seen books on the topic. There's a lot of different ways that we can phrase this, right? Here's one, crucial conversations. Here's another one, fierce conversations. Here's another one, difficult conversations. My personal favorite terminology for it is courageous conversations. And what you and I are going to do today is work on how to improve your comfort with those kinds of conversations and your outcomes. Now, there are 13 master skills for being an effective leader. And I would venture to say that this is perhaps the most important one, because if you do it well, there are amazing impacts. If you do it poorly, there are grave impacts. So today, I'm going to walk you through how to have that kind of conversation. Imagine if you are a supervisor and you need to give some corrective feedback to your employee. How would you do that? Imagine if you want to have an important conversation, a courageous conversation with your boss or a supervisor. Imagine that you want to have an important conversation with a loved one. How do you do that? So the model I'm going to teach you today comes from a format called Constructive Dialogue, and it's the best model. There are essentially 4 steps in it. I did not invent this, but my personal favorite kinds of tools are the ones that are simple and elegant, meaning that they're really memorable in the moment. So I'm going to teach that to you today. Are you ready? So here we go. The first step is, when we want to figure out if we need to have a conversation, we need to get clear on our intent. Why do I want to have that conversation? So once you're clear and it's a good intent, we then are going to, before we even get into the B, we're gonna have an intro, right? Introduction. What that means is you want to take 30 seconds, and when you're with the person that you're going to be communicating with, you don't want to blindside them. Meaning you don't want to jump right in and say, here are some things you need to work on, and dive right in. And you also don't want to dance around it, meaning you want to get clear for them what you're about to have a conversation about. Practice ahead of time. Don't imagine that you're going to do it perfectly right the very first time. Practice to the wall, practice to a friend, but you're going to start with an intro, 30 seconds. So an example for the introduction is, I might say, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you about your impact and your attitude at our team meetings. During this conversation, I'd like to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about, and I want you to know I have full confidence that we can fully turn this around. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. Then we go to B, and what B stands for is behavior. So behavior is then the first part once you're diving in. This is where you're sharing the facts, right? You know that old, just the facts, ma'am. This is where you're sharing the data, the information of what happened. Now you might think, why do I have to recap that? They were there, obviously. But this is important because your role is to connect the dots for them, especially if there's a larger pattern. You're pulling in this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece, and perhaps they haven't seen it as clearly. Now there's a really important piece. If you have a fear that the person's going to want to immediately jump in and defend or give you explanation or that kind of thing, in the beginning somewhere, tell them, I want to share some thoughts with you, and then I want to make sure for us to have time for me to hear your perspective as well. So that's coming. Just hear me out first, so that you can get all of this covered first. If not, sometimes people want to jump in sooner. Once you slow down and give the full behavior piece, that's also like a mantra through this whole part, is slow down, take a breath. It's okay to take some time. Don't speed through it. It's really hard to do a redo after you've done it once, so make this part count. Then we're going to get to the second one, the E, which are effects. This part means, why are you bringing it up? So you could even lead in with that exactly. The reason I'm mentioning this is, if you're looking for other phraseology or terminology, the behavior part, you can even start with, I noticed, right? That's a softer way to say you did these things and they were bad or whatever, right? So in this part now, you're saying the reason I'm bringing this up is. Now, this is where you're really connecting the dots. Let me use the example of somebody being late. What I would say is, the reason I'm bringing this up is, and I'm going to give as many reasons as I can think of. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, one, I'm concerned that other people think that I'm playing favorites when I don't hold you accountable for being on time and everybody else is on time. Secondly, if you aren't pulling your weight, meaning you're not being on time like everybody else is, other people have to pick up your slack. Thirdly, I feel incompetent, as do others, when our clients call in and are wondering where you are and we have to say, I don't know. And then the fourth is probably the most important to me, which is whenever you are late, and I know you're supposed to be on time, I start to wonder where else you're trying to sneak in under the radar and aren't necessarily being above board. So as you can see, it lowers my trust a little bit. I know that's not your intent, but that's the effect. That's the impact. So now we've gone through B and E. Now the very important part before we get to S, I'm going to make a big old line here, is this is where we are going to now listen, and listen. So we want to open up the conversation to them. You and I know in normal conversation, when one person goes quiet, what it means for the other is it's their turn to talk. Let's make it a little bit more effective in terms of communication. Let's be a little more clear. Let's invite them in. Language you can use is, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. Or language you could use is, okay, I've just given you a lot of information. What are your thoughts? And then you listen. Now, many different things could happen. One, they could immediately go to, I'm so sorry, this is never going to happen again. And they might even layer some shame on top of it. If they go there, okay, that's okay. But here, slow it down, because you want to understand what's the root cause of the lateness so that you can solve it together better. So you might say, I really appreciate your willingness to change. So tell me a little bit about what's been going on for you. Why have you been late? And let them explain. Another direction they may go is a counterattack. If they view this as an attack, although that is not your intent at all, they might start trying to get you to take the bait. Meaning they might say, well, Julie, I saw that you were late 6 Wednesdays ago. What I'm going to do in that moment is not take the bait, not defend that scenario, but I'm going to say, oh, okay. So the reason you thought it was okay to be late is because you thought that I'm also late, and so that's kind of the culture, how we do it around here. Is that right? And if they say yes, whatever, then you say, okay, great. Tell me more. What else? If they then start explaining, I'm going to put it in quotes, excuses, right? My alarm didn't go off. I got stuck behind the train, whatever. At my old work, we didn't have to do this. I'm struggling with childcare, all of that. You're going to listen and you can empathize. It's absolutely okay to talk about, like, that sounds hard. You've got a lot going on. Oh my goodness. I didn't know, whatever it might be. But just know that it is important for them to, again, in quotes, share their excuses, because those are actually reasons. I'm going to ask you to take excuses out of your vocabulary and recognize that it's important to understand the reasons. Now, if they share some, keep trying to get more and more until you've fully heard everything that you can in this section. When people are given the space to be heard, they felt understood. This does not mean you're taking them off the hook and saying it's okay, because you're going to see in a moment you are going to put them on the hook. So after you've done listening, say more, tell me more. Oh, how interesting. Can you say more on that, right? You're asking questions, you're getting them to communicate. Then we're going to go to the S. The S is solve. Now, raise your hand out there for any of you who are fixers, right? I can definitely identify with that. Fixers meaning you see a problem and it instantly, you know how to solve it. It needs to be fixed. Now, the problem with that is that you can see this solve is just the third step. It's not the first step. If it was the first step, it would sound something like, hey, you were late last week, fix it. You were late last week, don't let it happen again. That's going immediately to solving, and you can also see that's not solving it very effectively or well. So you need to slow this down. Now, in the solve part, this is where you get to say, after you've empathized, like, wow, that's hard, wow, you've got a lot going on, you get to say what your expectations are and work towards solutions. So it might be, wow, you've got a lot going on, it sounds really difficult. Okay, so what I do know is that we really need to change this around. I need you to be on time 99.2% of the time. So let's start brainstorming together right now what you might do differently to get you here on time. And then the power of the pen. I'm going to grab a pen or a marker, and I'm going to grab something to write on that they can also see. And I'm going to start writing down suggestions. I'm going to say, okay, so let's brainstorm together. You start. Now, they might give you wonderful ideas, and then you don't have to suggest anything after that. Wonderful. That's ideal. Or they might give you terrible suggestions. If they give you terrible suggestions, here's what to do. Are you ready? Are you paying attention? You write them down anyway. One thing that we know is if we stop people, if we say no and we say no and why, we end brainstorming. Right? What we communicate to someone else is like, you have bad ideas. I'm just giving you lip service and waiting until it's my turn to give the good ideas. So let's say they say, well, Julie, you're just too rigid. And so how about you lighten up? Right? So I would say, okay, so one of your suggestions is that like I be a little more flexible and not have such strict standards for showing up. Is that right? Great, I'm gonna write that down. Okay, and then they say, I don't know, whatever some of their other ideas are. Now, I want to tell you of one time when I was coaching somebody, and she said, I know exactly what's going to happen in this part because I've worked with this person a lot before, and they're defensive consistently, and they also get pretty inflamed when they get constructive feedback. So she said, what my person is going to say during this conversation is, okay, fine, well, I'll just quit then. So we practiced, and it went exactly as she thought it would. So the person said, fine, why don't I just quit then? And so the person I was coaching said, okay, so let me get this straight. One suggestion that you're saying that we should move forward with or bring to the table is for you to resign. Is that right? And you know that's not what somebody means. 9 times out of 10, that's not what they mean. And so when she was pushing back in that way, just by paraphrasing, having the person hear what they have just said, the person gets to explain more, right? No, I don't mean I really quit. I just mean I think you're always coming down hard on me, or I feel like I can never do anything right here. And that's important. That's stuff you want to hear because then you can address that issue. What you're seeing is that when we slow down and get more information, we are going to get to solve the problem better. So now we're writing down all these different ideas. Let's say you then want to add on some ideas that they didn't yet mention. You say, okay, I'm going to add a few ideas. Here's one, and here's another, and here's another. Then, before we go to the last step, which is T, you're going to figure out how you're going to decide. Meaning that sometimes in negotiation, in conversation, this part is missed. Pay attention in your conversations when decisions are being made. If you focus on now, how are we going to to decide. So what you would do is you take the list and you say, okay, we've got about 7 different ideas right here, right now. If it's going to be you just get to decide, that's okay. If it's going to be a different way, that's okay. Just be clear about that. If it's going to be, I'm going to get to pick and choose because I can, I'm going to say, I'd like to move forward with this one and this one and this one. Can you live with that? You want to make sure they're willing to agree, because if not, you're going to go a very different direction in the conversation, as you can imagine. But it's just, can you live with that? It's not, do you love that? You get it? So then you've figured out the next steps. Instead of good talk, right? I'm glad we had a conversation about this. You now have an action plan. Now the last one here is then thank. The T is thank. Just meaning at the end of the conversation, before you wrap it up, you're going to thank them authentically for having a conversation with you, for being willing to stay in the room, for being honest and authentic, and for being the kind of person who's willing to have this kind of conversation and move positively forward. If you had any fear about this conversation going awry or damaging the relationship, this is where you get to sew it and knit it back up, because you're appreciating them and their character and what has just happened. Now, at the very end, I'm going to put a little star down here. Before they walk out of the room, before you hang up the phone call, you're going to talk about when you can follow up. Don't miss this part, so write it down. At the end of the conversation, you're going to say, whatever, thank you so much, and I'd like to check back in about this in about a month, or whatever the time frame is for you, just to see how things are going. Probably what'll happen is I'll just give you a great high five and tell you thanks so much for turning things around. If you don't have that conversation, it's going to be very hard, because if they don't 100% fix everything that you've just talked about, you're going to notice, and then you're going to wonder, when can I bring this up? And then you're going to think, is it nagging? And then is it too soon? So have a concrete time when you are going to follow up. Also in that way, you don't give a frozen evaluation to this person where you forever after think they're the late person, where you're not noticing improvement and change, which that wouldn't be fair to them. If this was helpful for you, I'd like to give you access to our group coaching intensive that is starting soon. It's honestly the most authentic way that I know to develop your skills and to be the kind of leader that you want to be. In honor of it being the new year, we'd like to give you a deep discount of $150, and this group coaching intensive starts February 26, 2021. If you would like massive skill development as a leader, and you'd also like to do it in community with other dynamic leaders, working directly with them, with leaders outside of your organization, be sure to check this out. Lancaster Leadership works with leaders who want to bring both productivity and joy into their lives. If this group coaching intensive sounds right for you, click on the link below to reserve your spot today.